the future of the full stack developer. And the reason it confused me is in the indie SaaS world, it's all about the full stack developer. Like full stack developers, that's what you want. That's who you want to build a business with, right? Is those kinds of people. You got Jack Ellis and you've got Paul Jarvis with Fathom. And so the idea that there's something else going on in the developer ecosystem that I'm not aware of. Is it like bigger companies are moving more to like a separation of front end and back end, or what's going on in there that I don't understand?
Bro, I wish I knew. So like, here's the thing. I think partly it's very hard to tell like what is real in web development.
Yeah.
Because you're on Twitter and certain things are amplified that they're being amplified on Twitter, but like the correlation to real life is not the same as Twitter.
Yeah.
So like on Twitter, it feels like everyone's building React front ends.
Yeah.
They're calling APIs and GraphQL APIs or Firebase or whatever else they're using.
Yeah.
But I know deep down, the reality is 99.9% of web applications are not that.
Yeah.
And so but I think like me and Adam have talked a lot about this. It's like, and we're just so confused because the kinds of things that like the makers in that space are building are not things like Vapor and Transistor and Forge. They're much like simpler things.
Yeah.
So it's been hard for me, and this is something where I have to like stay really grounded and not get pulled a lot of different directions, because deep down I know like Laravel and Rails and like full stack development is like the bread and butter of most real things happening on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on Twitter, it can just, like you said, it's just like a magnification thing where it feels like, man, everyone's just kind of doing something else now.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like, I don't think that's actually the case necessarily.
Yeah. So is it a little bit of pressure from like, you just feel like the young kids are getting into this new stuff and there's some of that pressure? Like,
yeah, I think it's true that like the young kids are all starting with JavaScript.
Yeah.
As their first language, and they're kind of building their first websites or web apps or whatever with JavaScript, and maybe they're getting more into backend later. Whereas like people that are our age didn't necessarily start that way. A lot of them started with like a scripting language on the back end, actually, like PHP or like Rails or something like that. And that's kind of how they got into web development. And they learned JavaScript later when they needed to do more complicated front end stuff. And it's like all the kids are learning JavaScript first, and they're learning back end later when they need to do more complicated back end stuff. So it's kind of reversed. And so, and I think a lot of the younger demographic is just more active and more excited and more public on Twitter. And so it kind of feels like things have changed and shifted in that way.
Yeah. The biggest thing is you want a pipeline of people, hopefully young people. And in order to grow or incubate that kind of pipeline, you need to plant some seeds. You need to like sponsor some boot camps. You need to like get a bunch of steps along the way so that by the time these kids graduate and, you know, they're super excited about bringing some new ideas to whatever company hires them. And I wonder if for whatever, like the JavaScript community has done a good job of getting into boot camps mostly. And, I almost feel it on the hiring side, like to hire a good Rails developer right now, they're all in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it's like, it's like, how could we hire someone young in their 20s who knows Rails? And there aren't any. And so it's almost like there needs to be some community work there, in the sense of like planting some seeds early on and getting people excited about, you know, building web apps these ways, but finding young developers that are excited about it.
Yeah, and we've even talked about we being Adam and I, like when we talk to some of these newer developers, we realize like they've never written like a database query. You know what I mean? They've never written a job that runs in the background.
Yeah.
And does stuff. And so like we were talking to some kind of prolific figures in that community, and we kind of pointed that out, like, hey, it feels like, you know, a lot of these developers are really talented, but like they don't know how to query a database.
Yeah.
And they saw that as like, why should they know? You know, like, why should they know? And it's like, well, if you're working on like 99% of existing web apps, like you're going to have to know how to query a database. Like the world is not actually running on Firebase.
Yes.
It's running on MySQL.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so I don't know, but like, I also don't want to be like a curmudgeon that's just like always hating the new stuff. Like you and your, I hate the new fancy rap music, you know, like I don't want to be like that. It's just, it's not a good vibe. And like, I want to figure out like, how can Laravel fit into this sort of new crowd in a way that is compelling and makes sense? And I think you're right that it's actually smart to plant seeds like at the front of the pipeline so that when people do want to do like kind of graduate to some kind of complicated back-end stuff, it's like, oh, well, Laravel would be a natural choice, you know, and they kind of land in our ecosystem that way.
Yeah, I appreciated that part of your interview with Tobias. You were saying, you know, I still want to be open to something being there. It's like, I've been super critical of Web3. And I think, there's two sides of this. Like people say, well, I don't want to hear any negativity on Twitter or hating or whatever. It's like,
right.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's okay to have some people pushing back on ideas. You know, not all new ideas are good. And the whole idea of having free speech is so we can test ideas in the comments. Let's have it out. Let's talk about the pros and the cons. And for sure, older people, we are more attached to old ideas. I know that's true. And we can be open to new ideas, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't challenge them either, you know? So there's like this balance there that I find sometimes is difficult, but I think we do need to be open to new stuff. I'm still open to this idea that, you know, in a decade, there's going to be something that comes out of Web3 that's incredibly compelling. I haven't seen it yet.
That's not buying drugs.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be like, I need to buy drugs, and I'll be like, shit, I should have learned some Web3. That's the only way you can buy them now.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, I agree pretty much.
And I mean, it's probably for you, it's probably also worth returning to your youth and thinking through the reason you and your buddy chose PHP in college was because it was the thing. He was like, this is the coolest, easiest, funnest way to build a website or a web application. And that's just branding. You know, that's just PHP, whether intentional or not, at the time being like, are you going to build it in Perl or are you going to build it in PHP? And it's like, well, we're going to build it in PHP. Are you going to build it in .NET and have to buy a license? No, you're going to build it in PHP. And so some of that's just branding, and maybe Rails and Laravel and these other things, it's just about branding. It's about saying, you know, this isn't uncool. It's actually, from an indie, like punk rock, bootstrap kind of perspective, it is the coolest shit because you're going to be able to build stuff on your own and maybe make a life for yourself outside of having to work for Facebook for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And when you were just saying that, one of the key words that stuck out to me was easy. It was the easiest at the time.
Yeah.
And I think going forward, I'm trying not to like rest on our laurels and assuming that Laravel is easy for new developers. And so one of the new hires we're bringing on is a woman in Australia named Jessica Archer.
Oh yeah.
And
I know
actually
her.
one of the first projects that I've kind of already given her like a sneak peek, like, hey, I think it would be cool if you worked on this when you get here, is basically taking DHH's like build a blog in Rails tutorial and really revitalizing that for Laravel and for the web ecosystem as it stands today. So like maybe it does use React with inertia on the front end, but it uses Laravel on the back end, and how to build that in a single repository so that it feels really great and make it all really, really accessible, really interesting and catchy and, attractive in terms of marketing and branding, so that we can actually ensure that Laravel feels like the easiest way to get started building a serious full stack web application. Because I think for the past few years, I've sort of assumed like, well, of course it's easy. Like go to the documentation and read it. And I think I've kind of realized like, okay, well, I have to go to the installation page and read how to install it. And that seems easy, but now I have to go to a different page to read about how to get stuff out of the database. And then I have to go to a different page to read about how to like validate my forms. Yeah. And it's like, man, it would be really great if we just had one cohesive build a blog style tutorial, but probably not a blog, since I think that's kind of like old school web. Yeah. That actually walked you through a cohesive story of like shipping something maybe all the way to Laravel Vapor on one page, and walked you through the whole process and made it really simple. Yeah. So that's we're doing a lot of work behind the scenes on that right now on Laravel Vapor, and I think Vercel has really inspired us in that regard to make Vapor even easier to onboard. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that Vercel has done really well is like if you have a Next application or whatever and you just can deploy it so quickly and so easily. Yeah. So we're trying to do that. And I think I'm excited about that, to try to ensure that we actually are the easiest, because I think it's, as you get older and as you've used things more, you just kind of assume things are easy when they no longer are.
Well, and even thinking back, if you listen to any podcast, if you listen to how you got started, if you listen to anybody, so many people say, well, I got started, I got interested, I got hooked programming stuff in Flash, or programming stuff in HyperCard, or programming stuff in Microsoft Access. Like tons of people got started like that. And the reason is if you're 12 and you want to build something, you want it to be easy and fun and accessible. Like those are the three things. If it costs too much money, I can't do it. If it's not fun, I can't do it. And if I can't get something on the page where I feel the magical part with anything you've built yourself is like showing people, like, look at this program I built in HyperCard, look how fun this is. And I love that idea. Do you know what you're going to build it around? You said it's not going to be a blog. What is it going to be?
No, I actually don't know. And that's something I'd like for me and Jess to figure out together. I just feel like blog feels like very web 1.0, and nobody actually does that anymore. Like I feel like very few people even blog in that style anymore.
Yeah.